top 3 differences between the Marine Corps and the Army. Let's go.
So I can understand why everyone is interested in knowing who would win in a fight, the Army or the Marine Corps. I think that's the wrong question to ask.
Well, as we all know, inter-service rivalries are part of it. If you're not doing it, you're not in the military. Now, in a fight, we all know the Marine Corps would win. This is a good video. Let's keep going.
I mean, don't get me wrong, those kinds of hypotheticals are fun, but to me, the real question is what are the differences in equipment, training, and the purposes on the battlefield? We want to know why these branches are separate when they kind of do jobs that appear similar on the surface. The Army and the Marines' entire purpose.
I can tell you what the Marine Corps does different. They do everything possibly on the cheapest way known to man. So if there's old gear, they're proud to use it. The Marine Corps is proud to do everything cheap, or they think it's hard, right? I guess cheap can be defined as hard. I remember going to an Army base, Fort Benning, and was just shocked at the quality of the gear in comparison to what we had. Now, what am I talking about? Alice packs, shelter halves, just even M16s. Just seemed like the Army shit was better.
To cover down on each other's blind spots within combined ops. First and foremost, we have the cultural differences. Just like how Google has a very different culture than working at IBM, it's also way different to work for the Marines. Intense fighters, hardcore partiers, they work and they play hard. The stereotypes include them being dumb, even though they have higher standards for joining. You need a high school.
Yeah, when I went in the Marine Corps, the easiest service to get into was the Army. Now, I think it depends on the recruiting needs, etc. Marine Corps is just a younger service if you look at it, the average. And it's somewhat like a cult. You know, if you be around my buddies that are in the Army, they'd always kind of joke about it, how we were kind of cultish. Definitely like to party. Cran thing is new to me. I don't know when that came about.
Diploma, while the Army accepts GEDs. The Marines do intense PT. They do intense discipline. The Marines have a scrappy culture of getting things done with less money and less resources, even when they deal with budget cuts.
Yeah, he hit the nail on the head. They like to do stuff on the cheap, and I think part of it is self-preservation, right? You know, they do cross a lot of boundaries. You know, all these do now. Look with the SEALs, could be working with Delta, could be working with the Rangers, could work with the Marines. I mean, the SEALs are a water-based operation. That was the point. They've been in the desert for 2 years. Everybody's crossing over in everybody else's turf.
Army culture is more like staying at your cool uncle's apartment for the weekend. He lets you do whatever you want until you touch his motorcycle and he flips out. The Army would say in response to the Marine culture that they choose to fight smart, not hard. Here are some main reasons as to why the branches have different cultures. I think the main reason is the alert status of the Marine Corps. When you're in an organization like the Army, which is meant to sustain operations for a long period of time, you're going to have a more chill culture, I think.
Yeah, that could be true. You figure there's Marines on ships all the time, so they're easy to deploy. It's a smaller force. I don't know if it's 1/5, 1/6 the size. You don't have a medical corps. You just don't have as much admin related to keeping this big Army going. Because he's right, the Army is there to sustain it. It's a massive operation.
The Army is tasked with creating and maintaining logistics, supply lines, communications, security, helping local populations with humanitarian aid. They're set up to be able to accomplish these missions across a long period of time. They're medium speed, medium drag organization, if you want to think of it that way. The Marines have a military culture focused on discipline. Their gear needs to be packed and ready to go. They can't be disorganized or a bunch of shitbags, because if they were, they would lose their one main advantage and then they'd lose all their funding.
Yeah, I do believe it's a funding issue. And the Marine Corps does pride itself on little picayune points like discipline, the way the uniform looks, the high and tight, the haircut. If you just go to a military base, say an Air Force base, you can pick a jarhead out. You can pick a jarhead or a Marine out at an Army base. Now, does that make one better than the other? No, it's just from day one, they instill a certain attitude in you in the Marine Corps, which is different from talking to my Army buddies. You know, I always thought we'd be somewhat the same, but in some of the training parts, it's just a little different method to do it. You know, you may be fighting the same war, but how you get there and how you're raised is a tad on the unique side.
For years, you've all heard the stereotype of how the Marines just get the hand-me-down equipment and guns from the Army. But it looks like that isn't true anymore. The tables have turned. The Marines now get new and improved Heckler & Koch M27 IAR rifles to replace their old M4s. They got suppressors for all their weapons, like high-speed special forces. The regular Army doesn't get that, but this came at a cost. The Marine Corps is getting rid of 7 different jobs. Among those cuts is the main battle tank MOS. They're also cutting the military police officer MOS. The second major difference.
Yeah, I don't know what to think of getting rid of tankers, some artillery, battalions, MPs. I guess maybe they'll use Navy Shore Patrol. I mean, there's a budget, so they have to live within the budget. I'd rather see them give it to the troops. So if you're going to cut somewhere, you say, hey, we can give the troops more firepower, right? We can make them more lethal on the battlefield. That's a good idea. But then you got to figure constraints when you're in battle, like if you need tanks, air support, how that's all going to come together. So it should be interesting.
They organize their infantry companies completely different. The Marines throw all their heavy machine guns, rocket launchers, sniper assets into one big platoon, and they pull those elements from there depending on what a specific mission calls for. The Marine Corps is testing out adding 4 extra Marines to each squad. The new 15-man squad is almost twice the size of the 9-man Army squad. In this experimental setup, each Marine squad will now have an assistant squad leader that looks after comms and helps direct fire. These updates are meant to accommodate the growing number of technologies that each squad has to keep track of.
Yeah, the tech, whether it be drones, whether it be some sort of other artillery, portable artillery, whatever the latest thing's going to be, I'm going to call it artillery. It's tough because each person's got to be a little more sophisticated than they were in the past, because the comms alone, or the GPSs and the sat phones, you got to be better trained than they used to be.
Marine Infantry Squad will now be assigned a drone, an iPad, and this is all so they can keep track of the GPS location of each Marine. They will now have anti-tank measures organic to the squad. 15 Marines per squad might sound like too many, but the reason I think it's going to work for the Marines here is because they break the squad down into 3 separate fire teams, so they're able to maintain command and control that way. The Army, on the other hand, has 4 squads in each platoon, but each squad only has 9 soldiers. Each squad is broken down into...
Now you wonder why we can't just do it the same, right? We're fighting the same battle. Why do we have to have things so different? Because neither party can agree to it, right? The Army generals can't agree, the Marine Corps generals. Mission set is a little different if you're talking about being on a ship, fast movers. But if you're in Afghanistan and it's a long duration mission, why do you have to have different size squads, for example, or fire teams? I never really understood the differences beyond who's got the bigger Johnson.
2 fire teams led by a team leader who's often a specialist. So you might be wondering, who is the extra 4th squad in the Army platoon? Herein lies one of the biggest differences between the branch platoon organization. The Army has their heavy weapons organic to each platoon, and they have their 240 Limas and assistant gunners and Javelin anti-tank system that makes up most of 4th squad. The Army and the Marine Corps will always fight in the same wars, yes, but they will often be given different tasks in those wars.
When he says different tasks, historically the Marines would be amphibious, like the SEALs would be. The Rangers secure an airfield. The last 2 decades, things have changed a lot. So I think we're looking back and saying, okay, what's going to happen? The Commandant of the Marine Corps has said we expect to be fighting in the South China Sea. Got to be faster movers, lighter on our feet, not be a slow-moving operation.
Army will have the responsibility for the easy area of operations in country, as well as putting elite forces in the difficult areas. The Marine Corps, though, will almost exclusively be given those dangerous, difficult areas of operations. So you'll see them fighting in Fallujah, in Iraq, and in Hamad, Afghanistan. The missions that Marines are tasked with will often include staying out in remote areas with less supplies. The Army...
Now that is true. Talking to some friends of mine, they were senior NCOs at this point during the last decade, and they said that they'd go to some of the big bases, and the difference between what the Marine Corps was offering up for long-term support and say the Army was radically different on these remote bases. Does that make the Marine Corps any better? No, but the Marine Corps does pride itself in doing that. And I think Marines pride themselves in doing more with less.
Has its own set of nightmares to worry about though, because they have to often figure out all the logistics for keeping massive areas of land secure. There have been several times when the Marine Corps was nearly cut completely by the Pentagon. They see the Marines performing many of the same operations that the Army does in Iraq, and they think they can save money by completely cutting them. The Marines are able to justify their role because they perform a function that the Army cannot. They're always ready to deploy anywhere in the world almost immediately. Here's a quote.
That is true, since you think about it, we got, 217 bases around the world, and we got ships all around the globe with Marines on it. Enough to do something, right? Perhaps secure an objective, be the first force on the battlefield. Things have changed so much, but originally that was the concept, right? Be able to take the Marines, could be a company-size element, and get them somewhere. In the meantime, the big Army can move in and do the long-term holding of an objective.
From the current Marine General David Berger, the central role of the Marine Corps is to be a ready force, the 911 force, the force that has to be the most ready when the nation is least ready.
It's that old expression you hear in some movies, first to go, last to know. That's what the Marine Corps does.